Today on The State of Us, 7 key takeaways from Biden's State of the Union address. Welcome to The State of Us. I am your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only friendly, redneck liberal, senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. We've got a full plate today to break down the takeaways from President Biden's State of the Union. And he emphasized the unified U.S. and world response to the Ukraine crisis, which we're going to pick into a little bit here, and also worked to lay out his efforts to fight inflation and the pandemic. So we're going to give a full 7 takeaways from it. It'll be quite a busy show, but before we get started, Lance, what's the word of the day?
Well, we're going to use a word that, for my generation anyway, maybe has a negative connotation, but it's a perfect definition for today. And the word is manifesto. 4 syllables, M-A-N-I-F-E-S-T-O, manifesto. And all a manifesto is a public declaration of motives and intentions by a government or by a person or group regarded as having some public importance. And so there were 4 manifestos last night. There was President Biden's, there was the Republican response, there was the progressive response, and there was the Black Caucus response. There's at least those 4 that I have read and heard about. So there were multiple manifestos made last night by that definition. So I think this is a word that we need to use and not necessarily think of it in a negative way.
So the way we're going to break this down today, like we said, there's 7. The first one's going to take some time because this particular takeaway from Biden's manifesto, the unity on Ukraine item, I think is have some thoughts. So if you watched, you would have seen that as Mr. Biden stated that he, referring to Putin, thought he could divide us at home in this chamber and this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well, but Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united. That did draw, as he also went on to say, an unmistakable signal to Ukraine and to the world, which prompted lengthy standing applause from the crowd, many of whom were wearing blue and yellow clothing and ribbons, the colors of the Ukrainian flag.
That made me think of 2 people. One being our old friend Camden, because when you say Putin, he would always say Putin when we talk about Russia. So thinking of Camden there, and then also thinking about Mr. Elon Musk.
How?
Because he said, he was quoted when last night he tweeted out that nobody watches the State of the Union address. Because when President Biden went on and on about how much Ford and GM are putting into EVs, he did not mention Tesla and Elon Musk. And so Elon Musk said, it doesn't matter. Nobody watches the State of the Union anyway. Gotta love those people who get their feelings hurt.
Well, that's what it's really about, right? Is whether or not you got mentioned in the State of the Union.
And if you didn't get mentioned, nobody watches.
Speaking of people who, well, and in fairness, I think saying that nobody watches it is probably... that's not necessarily
I'm just
fair.
saying, when you said if you watched it, it just made me think of Mr. Musk's manifesto that he put out, talking about his work in electric vehicles.
Right. I mean, usually it's tens of millions of viewers that watch the State of the Union, so I'm not sure that saying that nobody watched is exactly accurate. But speaking of people who did get shout-outs, the great state of Ohio got a shout out, which we'll talk about later in the show. But specifically as it pertains to Ukraine, I told Lance before the show, it's kind of like the thing with the whole I stand with Ukraine thing. And this, by the way, is not a Republican or Democrat exclusive thing. There's a lot of people doing this.
The article does point out that during this part of the speech that President Biden won bipartisan ovations.
Yes.
So this is not a Republican or Democratic point.
But everybody stood, right? I mean, this was a notable thing. Now, not everybody stood for everything, but specifically when he was recognizing the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, everybody in the chamber stood. I think it's nice, this solidarity thing, right? I mean, but just to be clear, it's nice, right? We're not doing what I think we should be doing, right? And even though Lance and I aren't necessarily 100% exactly on the same page about what we should be doing, I think we would both say we're not doing what we think we could be doing. And I'm equally, by the way, mad at Republicans for this completely idiotic response that, "Oh, well, Biden's weak on foreign policy and that's why this happened." Give me a break. I mean, really, just shut up, sit down. Don't you dare act like for 1 minute that if Trump was still president, that this wouldn't have somehow happened. Like that he would, he would have gotten it worked out because he would have been tough on Russia. Are you freaking kidding? Again, I'm not happy with what Biden is doing. I wouldn't be doing the same thing. So I am happy to be critical of it, but don't give me that, again, fill in the word. But don't give me that.
In my open-mindedness?
Yeah?
Yes, I can see that. I actually mentioned that to my wife the other night when we were discussing this. I said, there is, doing the devil's advocate part with who knows, right? We don't know what President Trump said to Putin in those closed-door meetings because there was nobody there. Those have never been, did Trump say something, or would Trump have acquiesced or given in? I mean, either one, right? Would Trump have said something like, "You know what? You do this, dude, I'm taking you out"? Or would Trump have said, "You know what? Here's $2 billion to the Putin campaign fund from the United States, so don't do this"? I don't know. Is that a possibility to your question? Yes, that's a possibility.
Realistic possibility was my question.
Isn't that realistic? You can't see President Trump doing either one of those things, offering to pay for Putin to stay out and funneling funds into Russia or negotiating agreements.
I could see it happening. I don't think it's likely.
Okay.
I'll rephrase it. How's that?
I'm just saying, do I think that would happen? No, I don't. But do I think there's a possibility? I think on that front, but I would not liked either one of those. Well, one of those I'm okay with, but I'm not sure that would have been done. Okay. I mean, I'm on, I am on the record as saying, I don't understand why nations are appeasing, and they're saying they're not. But to me, the nations of the world who are against what Russia is doing are appeasing Putin. And I don't think that's a good policy. I mean, they're within, not this article, but another one we were reading, it said where French President Macron had talked to Putin a month ago and he said he wouldn't enter. And then he talked to Putin this week, I think it was Monday, and said Putin promised him that he wouldn't attack the neighborhoods where people live. Okay, well, he promised you a month ago he wouldn't enter. He's already entered. So what makes you think that now? I mean, it sounds a whole lot like Neville Chamberlain in the Munich Pact before with Hitler back in 1938.
And folks, I'm sensitive too. It's easy to sit here, right, and play second guessing. And that's part of the frustration that I have with the not all Republicans, in fairness, because there's a lot of them, and I think that's worth mentioning because we want to give credit where credit is due. There are lots of Republicans who have generally supported Biden on this and said, we're glad that the United States collectively is, projecting a unified approach and all this. But I'm also sensitive to that it's easy to second guess these decisions from a reactive standpoint of, well, knowing what we know now, we should have done X, Y, Z. In fairness, Lance and I have been talking about the Ukraine issue since last year. We've talked about it multiple times. We're on the record having said, here's what we think we should do long before the invasion took place. So just to be clear, this is not in a silo either, right? It is definitely something that we've been talking about for a while.
That's true.
And have been trying to make sense of like everybody else. And the biggest thing, and not, again, like I said, I am on the record as I'm not strongly, mad at Biden for what he's doing, but I would not be doing the same thing. There's an important caveat there, which I always try to note. That's based on what I know right now. If I was in Biden's shoes, I might be doing exactly the same thing because I might know things. I would almost certainly know things that you and I and everybody else listening do not know.
That is true.
So, and I think we all just kind of like brush that off, and members of Congress, we know. Well, no, you don't. You really don't. you really don't know everything that Biden knows. And that's not like, oh, Biden's a great guy. No, he's just the president of the United States and he knows things. And the same could be said, of when Trump was president. It's good there's unity on Ukraine. I wish we were doing more. That's, I guess, how I would sum that up. That is the frustration that our listeners, picked up on in the earlier segment is I am displeased with the people being critical and not offering a real alternative. We're too weak on them. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Tell me what you want us to do.
Right. What would you do?
What is
That's
stronger?
all we ask.
Yep. That's what I want to know.
You can be against what's being done, but tell us what you would do if you were in that position.
And again, if you want to know what Lance and I think, go back and listen to our show from last week. For those of you listening on radio, don't forget you can hear us as a podcast as well. So you can definitely go back and hear those old episodes. So let's continue on takeaways. We've got the first one out of the way. We've got 6 more to get through. Ukraine was obviously the big one. The rest of these will move along quite a bit faster. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Seven takeaways from President Biden's State of the Union address. The first one was unity on Ukraine. The next one was pandemic optimism. A year ago, in President Biden's first joint address to Congress, he spoke to a masked and distanced audience as the nation was in the grips of the coronavirus pandemic. And on Tuesday, the chamber had a different look to go along with the president's more optimistic tone. While the audience was smaller than in years past before the pandemic, most were unmasked and attendees milled about, chatting and hugging ahead of the remarks. First Lady Jill Biden and most of her guests were not wearing masks, and Mr. Biden shook hands with lawmakers and others as he entered the chamber. That, by the way, is a direct quotation from the Wall Street Journal article, which is the foundation for today's show. You can find that linked, of course, at thestateofus.org. So, as this went on, it was basically an explanation, Lance, in my opinion, of basically saying that, hey, look, COVID's probably going to hang around for quite some time. We don't know if another variant's going to emerge, but things are trending in the right direction. We're a better understanding of how to manage this possibly on an ongoing basis.
He said the same thing last year, and the comment proved premature as the Delta variant took hold, then followed by Omicron. So, next fall and next winter we'll see. But it's not unlike what President Trump said when the virus first came through and said, it's all going to be better. We're going to get it taken care of. That's just the role you have to take as the president. The only thing I will add to what you really had to say, and that is that the masks weren't mandatory and you had to take a negative COVID-19 test. That was.
The test was mandatory.
The test was mandatory.
Okay.
Right. But here's the part that bothers me. Some Republicans boycotted the event because they didn't want to take the COVID test. Really?
Right.
The rest of us don't even get that opportunity, right? When I walk in, there aren't enough tests available for me to walk in to know that I'm going to be safe. For everybody else that's wherever I am was tested as well and had the vaccine and a negative test, right? I can't do that. They're offering this to you and you still won't do it. That's the disconnect that is bothering our country in all of these different issues, is that we won't even do what is available to you that's not available to the rest of us because you're taking a political stance. It just doesn't make sense to me. We can't sit down and talk and work this out because of things like that.
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating. As far as the current situation on COVID, there is some justification for Biden's optimism. It's a question of if it holds true or not. But as of Tuesday, the 7-day average for new cases in the U.S. was 69,549, which was down from levels that topped 800,000 in January. And about 76% of the American population has received at least one dose of the vaccine. So you're probably approaching that point now, Lance, I'd say, where the people that haven't gotten it probably not going to be getting it. But I do think that would be the single biggest distinguishing factor from last year when Biden said this and from the year before that when Trump said it, right, is that we actually do have a vaccine now. 76% of the population has received a dose. So again, as time goes on, those sorts of things have that impact. There are reasons, hopefully, to be optimistic about this. Next up, though, fighting inflation. As America faces rising prices for gas, goods, and services, Mr. Biden, who has struggled with surging inflation, said he has a plan to lower costs. The White House has already made a series of efforts to deal with price increases, including efforts to ease supply chain bottlenecks and target what it says is a lack of competition in key industries. But inflation, which recently hit a 40-year high, has proved to be a stubborn problem and a major political liability for Democrats in the midterms. So this culminated in a number of different things. Of course, Build Back Better was one of the items that was mentioned. This is a tricky one because, I mean, a lot of the things you're going to do, Lance, you're not going to feel immediately. Even if they work and there's a question of whether or not these things will work to combat inflation, even if they do work, a lot of them are not instantaneous things. Now, releasing additional barrels of crude oil would be an example of something more instantaneous, but a lot of the infrastructure related stuff is going to take longer to realize.
To the ability of Mr. Biden, and I'm reading from the article, and I have a problem with this. I don't know why we say Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump. If they're the president, they're the president, okay? Maybe that's a boomer thing, but there's a respect for the position. Whether you agree with the person and what they're doing, there's respect. It should have been President Trump. It should be President Biden, not Mr. or Ms. or whoever happens to be in office. It should be the president. So
I think I don't know. We'd have to confirm this. Maybe one of our listeners knows. I believe it may be an AP style guide thing where
I don't care.
The first time they're introduced with their full title, like President Biden. And then after that, you're allowed to shorten it to Mr.
Well, in this article, yeah, they do the first time they mention him as president, never after it's Mr. But to me, it should always be president. That's just a respect thing for whoever has the job. But very simply, he's not calling it the Build Back Better program. He's being expedient and saying, yeah, that idea just automatically throws up red flags. So he just talked about it. What that means is wants to cut the cost of prescription drugs, reduce energy costs, and lower the cost of childcare. That's what he's after, okay? So now, you don't use that name because that name obviously brings up negativity. So this is my ideas are, and he does what he normally does, and that is, he tries to make it anecdotal. And a quote, like many of you, I grew up in a family where if the price of food went up, it was felt throughout the entire family. It had an impact. So he's trying to let people know, I know what it's like for this to be. He's not arguing that it's not occurring, right? And here are the things I'm going to try to do to make it better. And hopefully it'll get better before the election for President Biden, because this will be something that will be very easy for the Republicans to win seats in the upcoming midterm elections if the economy, if inflation is still at this level.
The challenge is going to be that a lot of the things he'd like to do that he's mentioned there, obviously, to combat inflation would probably require action from Congress, which even with the, Democratic majorities has proved tricky for them to get things done along party lines, because a lot of the Democrats, the far left Democrats, hold out and, that's not enough. So we're just going to do nothing. So it'll be very interesting to see if any real meaningful progress from a presidential standpoint can be made on inflation and those gains. Next up, competing with China was on the docket. So obviously the war with Ukraine has focused on our longtime adversary, Russia. But Biden also made clear, I think, throughout the speech that he sees China ultimately as the major battle, both right now and for the future, which is why he worked to pitch his massive China-focused bill, which has yet to pass Congress, but it ultimately includes tens of billions of dollars for particularly domestic semiconductor production. And this is where I highlighted this earlier in the speech. Of course, everybody's excited when they get the shout out in the State of the Union. But Mr. Biden highlighted the plans from Intel, which is to invest $20 billion into chip factories in Ohio. Intel's chief executive was, in fact, in the audience, and Mr. Biden said he told him the company was prepared to increase its investment to $100 billion if Congress can pass this bill, which is quite the incentive. I'm not sure. Again, State of the Union, so we don't get a lot of details on this. Well, what does that mean? But that would be tremendous, not just for the state of Ohio, but for the country. Obviously, semiconductors, for those that don't know, they're a huge part of the reason that we're having issues like with the vehicles and, the availability of all sorts of different supplies, electronics. Semiconductors are a crucial component of that. So naturally, they were in fact featured as part of Biden's manifesto to address the problems currently facing the United States.
Well, and the final part of this piece was President Biden returning to the theme of bipartisanship, and he threw some things out there in this part of the manifesto that says we want to target opioid addiction and help people there. We want to help people with their mental health, and we want to support veterans in the treatment of cancer among veterans who have served in jobs where those things have they've been exposed, Blue, where they have been exposed to those types of diseases. So again, trying to reach across the aisle, talking about the things that, okay, maybe we don't agree on this and this, but we agree on these things. And so let's get something done in these areas. I think that's a positive step.
As always, the question is, will Congress actually do anything? Which I'm sure is incredibly frustrating for any president giving the State of the Union, because it is like, I mean, I agree with the statement, Lance. Yeah, we should all be able to make progress on those. But at the moment, Congress seems to not be interested in anybody giving any ground in either direction that would allow for much in the way of compromises. And I shouldn't say anybody. The Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, there are some senators, I think, who are interested in that. The problem is that there's just not enough of them. Most of them are perfectly happy to do the thing to get them reelected, which is to stand their firm ground and demand more, And God, I'm so tired of that. I hate that. I hate it so much, Lance. It's great for getting reelected. I'll say that. It's great for getting reelected. And I guess that's what we care about. That's what really matters. 3 more takeaways. We're going to talk about all of them. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Midterm messaging. It's an election year, baby. And the good old president can't give the State of the Union without a little bit of midterm messaging, right? So, Mr. Biden did emphasize a number of issues that were likely to be part of the Democratic message to voters. He very aggressively defended the American Rescue Plan, and that was the $1.9 trillion COVID relief law that passed about a year ago. He said, quote, "It worked. It created jobs, lots of jobs. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police." Those were a couple of the highlights. That one in particular was of interest because he's alluded to this before. It was, I think, the strongest rebuke that, to my knowledge, Lance, and correct me if I'm wrong, of the far left liberal wing of the party in basically saying, yeah, we're not going to do that. Like, we're not going to do it. So you can sit down and quit your whining about it, because that's not the approach. It doesn't solve problems. And again, what Biden's saying, I'm not necessarily concurring with that, just merely trying to express that I think that was a very strong, and that was one of the rare items other than the Ukraine piece that we actually saw some Republicans supportive of and saying, okay, because they've been calling him out hard on that, that he's just a hard left card carrying member of the liberal wing of the party. And basically, I think this was a rebuke to that, saying, no, we're not doing that.
Well, I think another thing too is when he aggressively defended the $1.9 trillion COVID relief law, he said it worked. It created jobs, lots of jobs. People are forgetting that when that passed, people were really struggling. People were facing evictions. People were struggling to put food on the table, to take care of their children, to feed their children. So has it maybe caused some inflation, been a part of the problem? Most definitely when you flood money in, it will. But people are forgetting the state that we were in as a country, that many people were in when the government did this. It doesn't mean it's not without its problems, but I think we need to stop and remember what the state of the country was when that went into effect with the midterms coming up. And the reason I think he talked about, we need to fund the police is that one of the potential flashpoints in the midterm elections is the rise of crime in big cities. So I think that, he needs to state that if he has any hopes of curbing the losses, which historically, right, first-term presidents lose seats in Congress. And President Biden's approval rating is down 12% from when he arrived in office in January of 2021. So this is his, other than any policy speech he wants to give between now and then, this is his last time on stage to lay out the reasons why I need you to support me. So, campaign messaging and all of that for Democrats, he had to cover all of that on Tuesday night with this speech. And that's what he was trying to do here.
Will any of it make a difference in the midterms, Lance? Or is it too late? Biden's sitting at, what is it here? The most recent one, 41% approval, I believe.
That's what I just said.
No, I did want an answer to the question, though, of do you think it makes a difference for the midterms? I mean, given that his approval is, as you stated, at 41%.
Again, what does making a difference?
Does it allow them to retain the House or the Senate?
No, that's not going to happen.
Oh, okay.
But could it make a difference? Maybe the margin's not as big, so that 2 years from the midterms, they could reestablish control. See, so sometimes there's
a war of attrition
in your semantics there, right? Is it going to allow them to keep? No, I don't think so. But the closer they can, the fewer seats they lose, the easier it will be to regain control in the next election. So, yeah, it can do some good.
I guess the other thing to note is that, so moving on to the next takeaway, is there were definitely limits to the unity, which we've already touched on a little bit. But as Biden focused yet less on Ukraine and more on the pandemic and inflation, he lost a lot of Republicans. So generally speaking, they did resist visible outbursts, and there were even some subtle head shakes, as the article points out. And some glances that could have been received as, possibly encouraging. It really is funny. It's quite this drama thing. It's like, well, get the right camera angle so that we can see if anybody's, maybe bobbing their head a little bit, because can't count on them to stand up. That'd be too much. Or clap, even clap sitting down. But there were some detractors in the room, Lance, weren't there? Some strong individuals.
Do we really have to give them? Do we really have to give them airtime? I'm not going to.
Okay.
If you want to, you can.
No.
But I mean, these people are so. I'm sorry. If you're their supporters, I apologize, and I'll just leave it at that.
I think that without going into too much detail, I mean, obviously somebody stood up and well, they didn't stand up. They yelled. Which. Again, in our country, we think that's weird, but in fairness, like in the United Kingdom, talking while other people are talking or actively objecting to speeches is a common part of how parliaments proceed.
I'm
generally.
not saying they don't have the right of free speech, okay? I'm not saying that they don't have the right to say what they want to say. I'm saying it's just so outlandish and so I don't want to give it any credence,
right?
Any respectability. Okay.
Yep.
Am I saying that they don't have the right to speak? No, I'm not saying that whatsoever. Am I saying that they don't have the right to their opinions? No, they definitely do. Okay. But they are so detrimental to, in my opinion, they are so detrimental to us moving forward as a nation and solving problems that I just don't want to give them any credence whatsoever. If they were speaking out and working to make things better in the country and working across the aisle, then most definitely, it's like Joe Manchin. All right. I don't agree with a lot of what Joe Manchin has done or said and the way he stopped things, but I think he truly does care, and he is trying to work across the aisle. He is trying to find some things. All right. These people who stand up and yell at the president, "Oh, you're the one who killed people." Really? How does that promote unity and trying to find a common ground? I have a real problem with saying their names. When you can look it up, folks.
Yeah, if you really want to know.
But what does that do for us as a country? I don't get it. Do they have the right to say it? Yes. Do they have the right to have that opinion? Yes. But you're an elected official. Try to promote the common good.
What I will say is one thing that's brought to attention, less so even about the speaking part, was the fact that members of Congress had their phones in the chamber and were able to tweet in real time.
Well, the ones who even, now to give credit, right? Where credit is due. At least these people who shouted out at the president, at least they showed up. There were a number of Republicans who wouldn't even take the COVID test to show up.
I think that it should be codified in the rules of the House of Representatives and the Senate that members of those parties are not allowed to be using their phones in any capacity, during official proceedings. I feel strongly about that. And you might say, well, why? It's the 21st century. No, because they don't have to pay attention then. And you're right. They don't have to pay attention even if they don't have their phone. But their phone is like the perfect way to not pay attention to what's going on. And I just think that's not the message we want to send. I don't think we as American people should be okay with our lawmakers being allowed to sit on their phone while the president of the United States is addressing them. I don't think that should be okay. Now, can you get your phone out right afterwards and say whatever you want? Sure. But we have said on multiple episodes, Lance, that if you give people even a short delay between what they wanted to say and when they actually are able to say it, there's a huge benefit to people thinking through just a little bit whether or not they really want to say what they were planning. And instead, we're not doing that. We're letting them be like small children and just say whatever they're thinking right in the moment as it's happening.
Well, then why don't we go back to what our founding fathers did, and that is just send the State of the Union over in written form and not have it be televised.
Well, that wouldn't be very good for re-election, Lance. I mean,
I'm just saying, you want to go back to the founding fathers being the resident historian. They just sent it across the street.
Was it Trump or Biden? Which one? They didn't, there was one of the pandemic years, and maybe it was both of them. There was one of those where we didn't have the State of the Union, and they in fact did do that because the president is required to provide an update on the State of the Union. So to Lance's point, it certainly can be done.
Takes care of a lot of issues.
Yep. So, okay, the last point here, Lance, the Republican response. So what can you tell us about that, Lance? How was the Republican response?
Well, what I found interesting in this part of it was given by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, and obviously it had a harsh critique of President Biden's presidency. But what I found interesting, and I did not know this, so it's something I guess I have not been reading up on, but she earlier in the day had signed a law as a major realignment of her state's personal income tax system. And she is up for re-election this year for the governor of Iowa. And she has also been mentioned by some as a possible running mate for former President Donald Trump should Trump decide to launch another White House bid. So that was interesting to me. I wondered why they chose her, okay, because it was not a name that I'm familiar with. And so that was the big takeaway from me. I know that you had another one that we talked about on the show, so I won't steal your thunder on that one. But again, typical Republican response as far as the invasion of Ukraine. See, I didn't use the there, make the millennial happy. The invasion of Ukraine, saying that the weakness on the world stage has a cost, and the president's approach to foreign policy has consistently been too little, too late. So there you have it. I know you found something else very interesting because she wanted to refer to some earlier times in American history.
Yeah, she says, quote, "We are now 1 year into his presidency, and instead of moving America forward, it feels like President Biden and his party have sent us back in time." It goes on to say, to the late 70s and early 80s, when runaway inflation was hammering families, a violent crime wave was crashing our cities, and the Soviet army was trying to redraw the world maps. And the thing that just came to mind is, okay, so instead of moving America forward, it feels like the president and his party have sent us back in time. There's a slogan that comes to mind. Something like "Make America Great Again," which was about America once having been great and that we should go back to what we did then to make us great once again. So I guess I'm confused about what the Republican platform is currently. And folks, I'm being facetious here. The Republican platform, like any party not in power, and in fairness, the Democrats took this stance when Trump was in office, is just to moan and complain and obstruct anything that the person in power wants to do and take whatever the counter is to anything that they're attempting to do to look smart and pretend like what the other people are doing is stupid. So, no, the Republicans don't actually believe that, just like they didn't actually believe in Make America Great Again. They just believe what's ever convenient at the time that they think is going to get them reelected. That's what they believe. And yeah, that's harsh, but I think it's true. And it's not just the Republicans, it is the Democrats as well. Again, they obstructed, and they complained about everything that Trump did, and then they used that to get Biden elected to the presidency. Biden wasn't elected because, people loved and believed in everything Joe Biden wanted to do for the United States. And that's harsh to say. Some people did. Sorry, the hypocrisy. We just talked about that when we were on when we had a guest interview that Lance and I participated in this last week, is call out the hypocrisy where it exists. And boy, was there some freaking hypocrisy there. So trying to stay, get my manifesto out there. I don't know if I have enough public importance for it to be considered a manifesto, but we'll give it a...
I'm not sure you fit the definition.
We'll give it a roll. Oh, okay.
The definition is a public declaration of motives and intentions by a government or by a person or group regarded as having some public importance.
Well, I have some public importance.
You do have some. There you go. You do have some.
What's some?
Yeah.
Some's very relative.
Your mom and dad and your husband think you're important.
That's true. That's some.
That's some.
That's some. Notice that he left himself out of that one. I'd just like to point that out.
I was letting that go unstated. I was just seeing if people could figure that out.
Gotcha. I'll be sure to not pick up a copy of the Liberal Redneck Manifesto then.
I wasn't counting on you buying it anyway.
Okay.
I was going to give you 4 copies for free.
Oh, okay. So I can give it to the some people that think that my beliefs are important. Okay. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Oh, well, because TrueChat has a mission, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And as you're talking around the water cooler, let people know that if this sounds interesting to them, that they can tune us in on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursday mornings as a podcast, and we're heard on the weekends across the United States on AM and FM radio stations. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
Justin, I love you, man. Everybody's up teasing you. This is Lance Jackson.
Did I win? Did I eke it out at the last minute? Because really, that's all that matters.
I don't know if you did or not. It was a 4-syllable word, so I think the money was on me.
I had a lot of hashes that I wrote down.
Did you?
But then
you always write down your hashes.
You were talking, and I wasn't always paying attention.
That you don't always listen to me.
That was helpful in the score.
Mm-hmm. And the way the score always goes.
Okay.
It's always helpful that you don't listen to me. I take in every word you say.
Oh, yeah. You think so?
I do.
All right, folks, play back the tapes. See if you think that's true. Thank you to producer extraordinaire Bradley Butch, and thank you, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.